The morning sun had barely kissed the peaks of the Sierra de las Cruces when Santiago Morales arrived at the San Rafael mine for the first time. He clutched his worn leather satchel against his chest, feeling the weight of his father's journal inside the last gift before consumption had taken the old man 3 months prior. The mine entrance yawned before him like a great stone mouth, its darkness absolute and hungry. "You're the new engineer?" A gruff voice called from behind a wooden cart piled high with pickaxes and oil lamps. Santiago turned to face a barrel-chested man with a face carved by decades of underground labor. Scars ran like pale rivers across his sunburned cheeks, and his left eye was milky white, blind as a cave fish. "Santiago Morales, sir. I studied at the School of Mines under Professor Velasquez." The man spat into the red dust at his feet. "Book learning won't help you down there, muchacho. I'm Rodrigo Sanchez, the capataz, the foreman. Been working this mine since I was 8 years old. My father before me, and his father before that. This mountain has drunk 3 generations of Sanchez blood." Santiago swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry despite the morning humidity. The owner, Don Armando Vega, he wrote that this mine would make Mexico City wealthy, that the silver veins run deeper here than anywhere else in the valley. Rodrigo's good eye fixed on Santiago with an intensity that made the young engineer shift his weight. "Don Armando hasn't set foot in this mine in 5 years. He sits in his mansion in the city center, counting his pesos, while we dig deeper and deeper. Last month, we broke through into a chamber that no man has seen in thousands of years. The air that came out." He paused, his weathered face growing pale. "It didn't smell like earth, muchacho. It smelled like breath." A chill ran down Santiago's spine despite the growing heat. "Breath? Forget I said anything. Old superstitions die hard in these mountains. Come, I'll introduce you to the crew. We start work in 20 minutes. As they walked toward the mine entrance, Santiago noticed a small shrine built into the rock face beside the opening. Dozens of candles flickered in the alcove, surrounding a crude carving of a figure that wasn't quite the Virgin Mary. Its eyes were too large, its mouth too wide, and its hands seemed to end in claws rather than fingers. "What is that?" Santiago asked, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. Rodrigo crossed himself quickly. "La boca del infierno," the mouth of hell. That's what the old Aztecs called this place before the Spanish came, before any of us started digging here. The locals say this mountain is hollow, that something ancient sleeps in its belly. We make offerings to appease both the Christian God and whatever dwelt here before he arrived. Can't be too careful in the darkness. But that's just indigenous mythology. Surely you don't believe." "Believe?" Rodrigo's laugh was bitter as unsweetened chocolate. "I've seen things in 40 years underground that would turn your educated mind inside out. *ingeniero*. 3 weeks ago, Miguel Torres went missing in the new shaft. We found his lamp still burning at the tunnel face, his pickaxe driven into the wall so hard it took 4 men to pull it free. But Miguel? Not a trace. Not a drop of blood, not a scrap of clothing, just his tools and a smell like rotting flowers." Santiago's academic confidence began to crack like thin ice. Perhaps he wandered off? Got lost in a side tunnel? Miguel was born in these tunnels. He knew every inch of this mine better than he knew his own children's faces. Men don't just vanish. Ingeniero*. They're taken. Before Santiago could respond, a bell clanged 3 times the signal for the shift to begin. From the workers' quarters nearby, Men emerged like shadows given flesh. There were perhaps 40 of them, ranging from boys no older than 12 to gray-bearded. Veterans who walked with permanent stoops from decades bent beneath low ceilings. Their faces bore the same haunted expression, eyes that had seen too much darkness and feared they would never see enough light. "Listen up!" Rodrigo's voice boomed across the assembly. "This is Santiago Morales, our new engineer. He's here to make sure we dig efficiently and safely. You treat him with respect, and he'll keep you alive." "Maybe." A few bitter laughs rippled through the crowd. Santiago noticed that none of the men would look directly at the mine entrance. They stood at angles to it, as if afraid to acknowledge its presence fully. "Today we continue excavating Shaft 7, Rodrigo continued. "The silver vein is thick there, richer than anything we've found in a decade. Don Armando wants output doubled by month's end, but we go carefully. We follow the rules. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Nobody ignores the bells. And nobody, absolutely nobody, enters the old chamber beyond the 7th seal without my direct permission. Entendido?" "Sí, capataz," the men mumbled in unison, their voices hollow. Santiago raised his hand tentatively. "What's the 7th seal?" The workers fell silent. Rodrigo's face darkened. "The 7th seal is a wall we built 15 years ago to block off the deepest section of the mine. What's beyond it? It's better left alone. But Don Armando has ordered us to break through. He believes the richest silver lies past that barrier. So we dig, Ingeniero. We dig because we have no choice. Our families need to eat. But every man here knows that when we break that seal, we'll let something out. Or worse, let something in." The descent took 20 minutes. Santiago clung to the rope ladder as it swayed against the shaft wall, his lamp casting wild shadows that seemed to move independently of its flame. The temperature dropped with each rung until his breath misted in the lamplight. Around him, the workers descended with practiced ease, their calloused hands and feet finding purchase on the worn rungs without thought. Deeper they went, through layers of red clay, through bands of limestone streaked with fossil shells from ancient seas, through veins of quartz that glittered like captured stars. The shaft twisted and turned, following the whims of geology and the desperation of previous generations of miners. Sometimes it narrowed to barely shoulder width. Sometimes it opened into pockets where 5 men could stand abreast. At 200 feet, they passed the first level, a warren of abandoned tunnels that Rodrigo said hadn't been worked in 30 years. The air that breathed from those passages was stale and cold, carrying sounds that might have been dripping water or might have been whispers. At 400 feet, the second level, here, a few workers split off, their lamps disappearing into horizontal shafts like candles carried into the night. At 600 feet, the temperature inverted. Instead of growing, cooler. The air suddenly became warm, then hot, then suffocating. Santiago gasped, loosening his collar. The breath of the mountain. Rodrigo called up from below, "This is how you know you're getting close to the heart." At 750 feet, they reached the bottom. The main chamber was vast, larger than any cathedral Santiago had ever seen. Massive wooden beams, each one the trunk of an entire tree, supported the ceiling in a complex lattice that reminded him of a rib cage. The walls glistened with moisture, and in the lamplight, the mineral deposits created the illusion of breathing tissue, pulsing and alive. "Madre de Dios," Santiago whispered. "Now you understand," Rodrigo said, clapping a heavy hand on the young engineer's shoulder. "This is San Rafael. This is where we harvest silver from the belly of the beast." The main chamber branched into 7 major shafts, each marked with a roughly carved number. Shafts 1 through 6 had thick timber supports, well-worn paths. But shaft 7 stood apart. Its entrance was blocked by a wall of fitted stones, and someone had painted symbols on every block, crude eyes and mouths and hands all pointing away, as if to say, "Go back, leave this place, forget what lies beyond." "How long until you break through?" Santiago asked, approaching the wall. 3 days, maybe 4. We've been taking it slow, watching for cave-ins or gas pockets. But there's something else. Rodrigo lowered his voice, though the nearest workers were 20 feet away. "The deeper we dig, the more the men complain of dreams. Terrible dreams of drowning in silver, of being swallowed by the earth, of something with too many teeth singing to them in the darkness." Santiago wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as superstition born of fear and exhaustion. But standing here, 700 feet below the sun, surrounded by pressing stone and insufficient light, he found his rationality crumbling. "I need to inspect the wall," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Check the structural integrity before you proceed. I'll come with you." They approached the 7th seal together. Up close, Santiago could see that the stones were different from the rest of the mine. Older, darker, carved with a precision that spoke of ancient mastery. These weren't rough mining stones, but carefully shaped blocks that fit together with hairline precision. And the symbols painted on them. "These aren't Christian," Santiago murmured, tracing one with his finger. The paint was sticky, almost wet, though it must have been applied years ago. "Aztec," Rodrigo confirmed. "Maybe older. When we first found this wall, there was a statue in front of it. A god or demon carved from black stone, its mouth full of crystal teeth. Don Armando had it removed and sold to a collector in France. That night, 3 men died in a collapse on the 2nd level. No warning, no structural weakness. The ceiling just came down and crushed them, flat." Santiago pressed his ear against the stone, listening. On the other side, he heard nothing. Not the absence of sound, but a quality of silence that felt deliberate, patient, waiting. "There's something I need to tell you," Rodrigo said suddenly. "About Miguel Torres, the man who disappeared. He wasn't taken by the mountain. He was taken by what lives in the mountain. I saw it. *Ingeniero*. I was the last person to see him alive." Santiago turned, his heart hammering. "What do you mean?" "We were working the face of Shaft 7. Clearing rubble from the previous day's blast. Miguel was ahead of me, muttering prayers under his breath. Then his lamp went out. Just died, though there was plenty of oil. In the darkness, I heard him scream, not a scream of pain, but of recognition, as if he'd seen someone he knew. Then the sound of dragging, like something being pulled away very fast. When I got my lamp relit, he was gone, but the wall..." Rodrigo's voice broke. The wall had changed. There was a gap where none existed before, just wide enough for a man, and from that gap came the smell of flowers rotting in summer heat. I ran. God help me, I ran and left him. "We need to stop the excavation," Santiago said urgently. "Report this to Don Armando. Get reinforcements." Don Armando doesn't care. I sent 3 letters describing the dangers, the disappearances, the dreams. He sent back orders to work faster. To him, we're already dead, just ghosts who haven't stopped walking yet. And we can't stop, Ingeniero. These men have families. If the mine closes, they starve. So we dig. We dig until we break through, or until the mountain breaks us. A bell rang one sharp note. Rodrigo stiffened. That's the warning bell. Something's wrong in one of the upper shafts. They ran, Santiago struggling to keep pace as Rodrigo navigated the tunnels with practiced ease. They climbed through shaft 4, where a group of workers had gathered around something on the ground. As they pushed through the crowd, Santiago saw it, and his stomach lurched. It was a hand, just a hand, severed at the wrist, still clutching a hammer. But the wound wasn't ragged as if torn or cut. The flesh ended smoothly, as if the rest of the arm had simply never existed. And the expression on the partial face visible in the lamplight wasn't one of pain but of ecstasy, mouth frozen in a smile of terrible joy. "That's Carlos Rios," one of the workers whispered. He was working alone in the side tunnel when we heard him laugh. Just laugh and laugh. Then, silence. "I told you nobody works alone," Rodrigo roared, but his anger was brittle, concealing terror. Santiago knelt beside the hand, his scientific training warring with his churning stomach. The cut was impossibly clean, the bone showing no fracture marks. It was as if Carlos had been erased rather than dismembered. "There's writing," someone said, "on the wall behind where we found it." They turned their lamps toward the tunnel wall. Scratched into the stone in frantic, uneven letters were words in Spanish. "It knows my name. It speaks with my Father's voice. It promises silver and gives eternity. I go willingly, I go home. Madre Santísima." Rodrigo breathed. He went into the wall. He went into the rock itself. "That's impossible," Santiago said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nothing is impossible down here, Ingeniero. Down here, the old laws don't apply. Down here, the mountain makes its own rules." A sound echoed through the chamber, a long, low note, like a church bell submerged in water. It came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in their bones. The lamps flickered, every flame bent in the same direction, toward shaft 7, toward the sealed chamber, as if drawn by invisible breath. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. The flames stood straight, the sound ceased, and the only noise was the panicked breathing of 40 terrified men. "We go back to the Pride surface," Rodrigo announced. "Right now, we're done for today." But as they turned to leave, Santiago noticed something that froze him in place. On the ground near the severed hand, something gleamed in the lamplight. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. It was a piece of silver, not ore, but refined silver, shaped like a tooth, a human tooth. And it was warm. Santiago didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small room in the workers' barracks, his father's journal open before him, reading by candlelight about the mines the old man had worked across Mexico. His father had been a practical man, a believer in geology and engineering. But in the final entries, written in a shaking hand as disease consumed him, he'd recorded something that Santiago had dismissed as fever dreams. Until now, the 12th of June, 1854, Zacatecas. There are places beneath the earth that were not meant for men. The old ones, the Aztecs, the Mixtecs, the peoples whose names we've forgotten, they knew this. They sealed certain caves, certain cracks in the earth, not because they feared what would come out, but because they feared what might go in, what might be changed. I have seen things in the deepest mines that cannot be explained by science. Workers who return from extended shifts different, their eyes reflecting lamplight in ways human eyes should not, speaking in voices that sound like their own but carry wrong harmonies, claiming they've found something, that they've been called, that they finally understand. They always disappear within a week, and the mine always grows richer afterward. I believe there is something beneath us. Not hell, not demons in the Christian sense, something older, something that exists in the spaces between rock, that swims through stone, the way fish swim through water, and it's hungry, not for flesh or blood, but for something else, for the essence of what makes us human, and it pays for its meals in silver. Santiago closed the journal, his hands shaking. His father had gone mad, surely. The disease had eaten his brain along with his lungs, but the tooth of silver on his desk, still warm to the touch, suggested otherwise. A knock at the door made him jump. "Come in." Rodrigo entered, carrying a bottle of mezcal and 2 clay cups. "You look like you need this." He poured generous measures for both of them and sat heavily on the room's only other chair. "Tell me everything," Santiago said. "How long has this been happening?" Rodrigo took a long drink before answering. "My grandfather told me that when the Spanish first came to this mountain, they found an entrance to caves that the locals called Mictlan, the land of the dead. The Aztecs had sealed it with prayers and blood magic, but the Spanish saw silver glinting in the darkness and broke the seals. For a year, the mine produced silver beyond imagination. Then, one morning, all 70 miners failed to come up from their shift. Search parties found the tunnels empty. The silver, gone. The only trace was a message carved into every wall, in every tunnel, repeated thousands of times. Asterisk. We are home. Asterisk. Why didn't they close the mine permanently? They did. For 50 years. But memory is short when silver is involved. In 1805, new owners reopened it. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then the disappearances started again. 1 or 2 a year at first, then more. Always the same pattern. Someone goes alone. Someone hears something familiar. Someone follows a voice or a light, and they're gone. But the mine keeps producing silver, the richest vein in Mexico City. How do you think Don Armando afforded his mansion? His land? His political connections? He knows, Santiago realized. He knows what's happening, and he doesn't care. Worse, he depends on it. The mine's productivity increased dramatically after we sealed the 7th shaft. It was like capping a boiling pot. The pressure built elsewhere. Now he wants us to break the seal, to release that pressure, to let it flow freely again. We can't. We have to refuse, to walk away. And go where? Rodrigo's voice was harsh. There are no other jobs. No other mines within 100 miles. These men have children who are hungry now, wives who need medicine now. You think they'll sacrifice their families to avoid a danger that might never come? That they might not even believe exists? Santiago stood and paced the small room. There has to be another way. We're educated men. We can document what's happening, bring in authorities. The authorities are bought and paid for by Don Armando. The church has declared these superstitions to be indigenous paganism. The scientific community would laugh us out of the city. Who would believe that there's something living in the rock? Something that trades silver for souls? Then what do we do? Rodrigo finished his drink and poured another. We dig. Carefully. and we pray to whatever God will listen that when we break through, whatever comes out is merciful." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night crickets singing, dogs barking in the distance, and beneath it all, if you listened very carefully, a low vibration that might have been the breathing of the earth itself. "Rodrigo," Santiago said quietly, "the silver tooth I found. It was warm." "I know. That's not normal. Silver doesn't hold heat like that." "I know. It means whatever's down there is alive, active, waiting." "I know." Rodrigo met his eyes, and Santiago saw in them the weariness of a man who'd lived too long with certain knowledge of impossible things. "Tomorrow, we go back down, and we continue the excavation, because that's what men do. We dig until we can't dig anymore, until the earth takes us or spits us out. That's the contract we signed the day we were born poor in a rich man's world." After Rodrigo left, Santiago tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the wall, those ancient stones covered in warnings that everyone had ignored. He thought about the workers below, about Miguel Torres and Carlos Rios and dozens of others whose names were recorded only in grief. Near midnight, he heard singing, a woman's voice, high and clear, coming from the direction of the mine. He went to his window and looked out across the compound. The mine entrance was visible in the moonlight, a black rectangle against darker stone, and standing before it, illuminated by the shrine's candles, was a figure. It was a woman in a white dress, her long black hair falling to her waist. She sang in a language Santiago didn't recognize, words that predated Spanish, maybe predated language itself. And as she sang, the mountains seemed to sing back, a low harmony that made the ground vibrate beneath his feet. He blinked, and she was gone. The candles still flickered, but the compound was empty. Only the echo of that strange song remained, fading like the memory of a dream. Santiago finally understood what his father had written. Some places were not meant to be disturbed. Some doors were sealed for good reason. But men, driven by greed or desperation or simple curiosity, always opened them eventually. Tomorrow, they would break through the seventh seal, and whatever had been waiting behind it for centuries would finally be free, or they would be consumed. Santiago picked up his pen and began to write, documenting everything that had happened, everything Rodrigo had told him. If something went wrong, if the worst came to pass, perhaps someone would find these pages and learn from their mistakes. Though he doubted it, men never learned. They just kept digging, generation after generation, into places that should have remained forever dark. And the earth, patient as stone, simply waited for them to dig deep enough to come home. 3 days had passed since the incident with Carlos Rios. 3 days of tense, careful work as the men chipped away at the ancient wall, each strike of hammer against chisel echoing through the tunnels like a countdown to something terrible. 3 days of dreams that left workers screaming in their bunks, of tools that went missing and appeared in impossible places, of shadows that moved against the lamplight. Santiago spent those days taking measurements, checking structural supports, and trying to maintain some semblance of scientific rationality in the face of mounting dread. But rationality was a thin shield against what he witnessed. The wall was fighting back, not metaphorically, literally fighting their attempts to break through. Workers reported their tools turning soft in their hands, metal becoming malleable as clay. Others swore the stones were moving, shifting position when no one watched, undoing hours of work in moments. And the smell, that smell of rotting flowers had permeated everything. It clung to their clothes, their hair, their skin. No amount of washing removed it. Some men claimed they could taste it, sweet and corrupt on their tongues. "We're through," Rodrigo called from the wall face. Santiago hurried over, his lamp held high. A hole had been breached in the seal just large enough to fit a fist through. Beyond it lay darkness so complete that their lamplight seemed to die at the threshold, swallowed by absence rather than merely dissipated. Nobody put their hand through. Santiago ordered, "We need to widen it carefully. Make sure the structure is stable before we—" A sound came through the hole. Laughter. A child's laughter, delighted and innocent, echoing from impossible depths. Every man in the chamber froze. "That's my daughter," whispered a worker named Tomas. His face had gone white as bone. "That's Maria, but she's up in the village. She's sick with fever. How is she down here?" "She's not," Rodrigo said firmly, grabbing Tomas before he could approach the hole. "It's a trick. The mountain is trying to lure you in." But now other sounds emerged from the breach. A woman singing a lullaby. A man calling someone's name. A dog barking joyfully, the way dogs bark when their masters come home. Each sound perfectly, intimately familiar to one of the workers. "My son," another man said, tears streaming down his face. "That's Javier. He died 5 years ago. I'd know his voice anywhere." "It's not real," Santiago insisted, though his own certainty was crumbling, because mixed in with all those voices was one that made his blood freeze. His father's voice, calling his name. Not the rasp of his final days, but the strong, healthy voice of Santiago's childhood. "Mijo, come here. I want to show you something wonderful. Come down, mijo. Come home." "Stop," Santiago whispered. Then louder, "Stop. Everyone back. Get away from the wall!" But it was too late for Tomas. The sound of his daughter's laughter had broken something in him. With a cry of desperate hope, he tore free from Rodrigo's grip and thrust his arm through the hole. "Maria! Papa's coming! Mija! Papa's!" His scream cut through the cavern like broken glass. His arm jerked, pulled by something on the other side. The workers grabbed him, trying to pull him back, but whatever had him was stronger, much stronger. "Don't let go!" Rodrigo shouted, wrapping his arms around Tomas's waist. "Pull! Everybody pull!" They pulled. 10 men, then 15, all hauling on Tomas as he shrieked in agony. For a moment, it seemed they might win. Then Tomas's arm came free from the hole. Just his arm. It ended at the shoulder, severed clean, but there was no blood. Instead, silver poured from the wound, liquid silver, steaming and luminous, pooling on the ground. And Tomas stopped screaming. He looked down at the silver flowing from his body and began to laugh. The same delighted laugh they'd heard from beyond the wall. "She's here," he said, his eyes wide with wonder. "Maria's here. She's beautiful. She's made of light. She says, I can come with her. She says, I can see everything, become everything. Oh God, it's so beautiful." His body convulsed. Silver spread across his skin like frost on a window, crystallizing, transforming. His flesh hardened, became metallic, reflective. His eyes turned to orbs of polished silver that caught the lamplight and threw it back in strange angles. His mouth opened wide, wider than any mouth should open, and more silver poured out. "Run!" Santiago screamed. The workers scattered, scrambling for the ladders, the exits, anywhere away from the thing that had been Tomas. But it was fast, impossibly fast. It moved like liquid, flowing across the ground, reaching out with arms that stretched like taffy, grabbing men and pulling them close. Where it touched them, they changed. Silver spread from the contact point, racing across skin, converting flesh to metal, thoughts to hunger. One by one, the touched men stopped running. They turned, their silver eyes gleaming, and began helping the thing that had been Tomas catch the others. Rodrigo grabbed Santiago's arm. "The explosives. We have to seal the chamber. Trap them down here. There are still men. They're already dead, or worse than dead, if those things get to the surface." Rodrigo didn't need to finish. They both knew what would happen. The entire city consumed, transformed, added to whatever was spreading from that hole in the ancient seal. They ran through the tunnels, Rodrigo leading the way to the supply cache where they kept the blasting powder. Behind them, they heard the sounds of pursuit, not footsteps, but the slithering, flowing sound of liquid metal moving at speed and singing. The transformed workers were singing in that ancient language, their voices harmonizing in ways human voices shouldn't be able to achieve. Here, Rodrigo fumbled with a keyring, his hand shaking so badly he dropped it twice before managing to unlock the powder magazine. Inside, barrels of blasting powder sat stacked against the walls, enough explosive to bring down half the mountain. "We'll place charges at the main support beams," Santiago said, his mind racing despite his terror. "Create a controlled collapse that seals off the 7th level without destroying the upper shafts." No time for controlled. "We light everything. Now." "But the men on the upper levels are dead anyway if we don't stop this." Rodrigo was already rolling barrels toward the chamber's entrance. "Help me!" They worked frantically, placing barrels at critical points, running fuse cord between them, creating a chain that would trigger every charge simultaneously. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. The singing grew louder. And beneath it all, a new sound emerged. The grinding of stone on stone as the hole in the 7th seal widened. Something was coming through. Something vast. "Light it!" Rodrigo shouted. Santiago struck a match, touched it to the fuse. It caught, sparked to life, began racing along the cord like a burning snake. They ran, climbing the rope ladder as fast as their exhausted bodies could manage, not daring to look back at what pursued them. Behind them, the silver tide flowed upward. Transformed workers scuttled along the walls and ceiling, their bodies no longer constrained by human limitations. And in the center of it all, something else rose, a shape that hurt to perceive, that seemed to exist in more directions than three-dimensional space should allow. It sang in a voice like galaxies colliding. The fuse reached the first barrel. The explosion came not as a single blast, but as a rippling wave of destruction that started at the deepest point and rolled upward through the mountain's heart. Santiago felt it through the rope ladder, a vibration that became a shaking, that became a violent convulsion as thousands of tons of earth began to move, climb. Rodrigo screamed, though his voice was barely audible over the roar of collapsing stone. The ladder swung wildly as the shaft walls buckled. Rocks fell like rain, small ones at first, then larger chunks that whistled past them in the darkness. Santiago's lamp had gone out in the chaos. Only Rodrigo's remained, casting insane shadows as they climbed through roiling dust. Below them, the silver tide had reached the base of the shaft. Santiago made the mistake of looking down and saw them climbing dozens of transformed workers, their metallic bodies flowing up the walls like mercury running backward. Their faces were still recognizable, still bore the features of the men they'd been, but their eyes reflected a hunger that was ancient and vast and utterly inhuman. "Don't look," Rodrigo commanded. "Just climb." A hand grabbed Santiago's ankle fingers of cold silver that burned like ice. He kicked frantically, connected with something that rang like a bell, and the hand released. But more were coming. The silver things moved with a coordination that spoke of singular purpose, of a shared consciousness driving multiple bodies. The shaft walls were collapsing now in earnest. Great sections of timber support gave way with cracks like gunshots. The rope ladder jerked and swayed as the upper anchor point shifted. Any moment now, it would tear free entirely and send them plummeting into the churning darkness below. Santiago's arms burned. His lungs screamed for air that wasn't choking dust. His fingers bled from gripping the rough rope. But still he climbed, rung after rung, driven by pure animal terror. A section of wall collapsed beside them, revealing a side tunnel Santiago didn't remember seeing on the way down. In the brief flash of Rodrigo's lamp, he glimpsed something impossible, a chamber filled with silver statues. But they weren't statues. They were people, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, all standing in perfect rows, all facing the same direction, all still alive, their silver eyes blinking. Slowly, their silver mouths moving in silent speech. Then, the vision was gone, buried under tons of falling rock. "There!" Rodrigo pointed upward. Far above, impossibly far, a circle of daylight appeared the main shaft entrance. "Keep going." But the silver tide was faster. The transformed workers had spread across the shaft walls like a living net, climbing faster than any human could, reaching out with elongating limbs to snatch at the fleeing men. One grabbed Rodrigo's leg, yanked him down. He screamed, slashed with his knife, and the blade struck silver flesh with a sound like a sword hitting an anvil. The silver thing didn't bleed. Where the knife cut, more silver flowed to seal the wound. It pulled itself up, Rodrigo's body, hand over hand, its mouth opening wide to reveal teeth like shattered mirrors. Santiago did the only thing he could think of. He kicked the thing as hard as possible. His boot connected with its head, knocked it loose. It fell, grabbing for purchase, catching one of the rope ladder's rungs. The rung snapped under its weight. The thing fell, tumbling into the darkness below. Its scream a sound of frustrated hunger rather than pain. "Move," Rodrigo gasped. They climbed. The daylight grew closer, larger, blessed, and bright. 200 feet, 150. Santiago could see workers at the entrance, their faces pale circles of shock, could hear them shouting, could smell fresh air mixing with the mineral stench rising from below. 20 feet from the surface, the main support beam gave way. The ladder jerked, dropped 10 feet in a heartbeat, slammed them against the shaft wall. Santiago lost his grip, fell, caught himself on a lower rung that nearly tore his arms from their sockets. Below, the shaft was collapsing in earnest now, the walls crumbling inward, beams snapping like kindling. And through it all, through dust and falling stone, silver things climbed, their bodies absorbing the impacts, reconstituting from damage that would have pulverized human flesh. Hands reached down from above. Workers, brave or foolish enough to risk the collapsing shaft, grabbed Santiago and Rodrigo, and pulled. They emerged into daylight just as the entrance shaft imploded behind them, a massive cloud of dust and debris exploding outward, throwing everyone to the ground. Santiago lay on his back, coughing, bleeding, alive. Above him, the sky was impossibly blue, the sun impossibly bright. For a moment, he felt nothing but gratitude for these simple things: air, light, the solid earth beneath him that wasn't trying to swallow him whole. Then, the screaming started. Not from the collapsed mine, but from the workers' barracks. Santiago rolled over, his body protesting every movement, and saw them. 3 men who had been on the upper levels, who had made it out before the main collapse, were staggering across the compound. Their skin had taken on a metallic sheen, and their movements were jerky, uncertain, as if they were puppets learning to control their strings. "Seal the compound!" Rodrigo shouted, forcing himself to his feet. "Nobody leaves! Nobody goes to the village!" But it was too late. One of the transformed men, Santiago, recognized him as Pedro Gutierrez, a gentle grandfather who had worked the mine for 40 years, turned toward the road leading to the nearest village. His silver eyes fixed on that direction with terrible purpose. And he began to run. Not with the shambling gait of an old man, but with fluid, inhuman speed. A young worker named Felipe tried to stop him. He grabbed Pedro's arm, and Santiago watched in horror as silver spread from the contact point, racing up Felipe's arm like fire on oil-soaked cloth. In seconds, Felipe's scream turned from terror to ecstasy, and 2 transformed beings were running toward the village instead of 1. "Horses!" Santiago yelled. "We need horses! Someone has to warn the city!" But when they reached the stables, they found the horses, already dead. Not killed, transformed. The animals stood in their stalls, their bodies now statues of solid silver, their eyes still showing the whites in eternal panic. Whatever had come up from the mine had spread faster and farther than any of them had realized. "The well?" Rodrigo said, his voice hollow. "They'll go for water sources first, contaminate them, spread through the entire valley in days." Santiago's mind raced. Think. Use your education, your training. There had to be a scientific explanation, a rational solution. But nothing in his years of study had prepared him for this, for living metal, for transformative contagion that spread through touch, for something that wore human faces while being utterly inhuman. "The shrine?" he said suddenly. "The old shrine by the mine entrance. The locals sealed this place once before. Maybe there's a record, instructions. The explosion destroyed it. Then we find a priest, a curandero, anyone who knows the old ways." Rodrigo laughed bitterly. "The church banned those practices decades ago. Anyone caught performing indigenous rituals is excommunicated, imprisoned. The old knowledge is dying with the old people, and they won't speak." A rumbling came from the collapsed mine entrance. Not the settling of disturbed earth, but something else. Something purposeful. Rocks were moving, being pushed aside from within. The silver tide was digging out. "How long?" Santiago asked. Rodrigo watched the entrance, his experienced eye assessing the debris pile. "Hours. Maybe less. Whatever's down there wants out badly enough. It'll find a way." Around them, the compound had descended into chaos. Workers were loading wagons with tools and supplies, preparing to flee. Others knelt in prayer, crossing themselves repeatedly. A few had armed themselves with pickaxes and shovels, forming a desperate defensive line that would be utterly useless against what was coming. Santiago grabbed Rodrigo's shoulders, forced, the foreman to look at him. My father's journal. He wrote about other mines where this happened. There must be something, some pattern, some weakness we can exploit. Your father's dead, asterisk, muchacho asterisk. Probably fortunate. He doesn't have to see what we've unleashed. He wrote that these things hunger for something beyond flesh, that they're trading silver for essence. What if we give them something else? A different offering? Like what? You want to sacrifice a virgin like the old Aztecs? Throw a priest into the pit? Rodrigo's voice was raw with despair. But Santiago's mind had caught on something. The silver tooth I found. It was warm, alive. The silver they produce, it's not just metal. It's part of them, a piece of whatever they are. What if we can? He was interrupted by a wet tearing sound. One of the partially transformed workers, a man named Augusto, whose left arm had turned silver, had picked up a rock and was bashing his own transformed limb. Not in panic, but, with clinical precision, trying to remove the infected portion before it spread further. "Help me!" Augusto screamed. "Cut it off! Before it reaches my heart!" Santiago and Rodrigo ran to him. Rodrigo pulled out his knife, but one look at where silver met flesh told them the truth. There was no clean line. No place to cut. The transformation wasn't replacing tissue. It was rewriting it at some fundamental level. To cut away the silver would be to cut away the man. "I can feel it," Augusto gasped. "In my mind, thoughts that aren't mine. Memories of things I never saw. Cities beneath the earth, older than mankind. Gardens where silver flowers bloom. And hunger. God, such hunger. It wants to grow, to spread, to transform everything until the whole world sings with its voice." "Fight it," Santiago urged. "You're still human. You can know." Augusto's voice had changed, taken on harmonics that resonated in Santiago's chest. "I'm becoming something better. Something that will never die, never suffer, never fear. Join us, Santiago. Let the silver in. Let it show you wonders." His eyes were fully silver now. His words came out metallic, bell-like. Rodrigo didn't hesitate. He raised his knife and drove it into Augusto's heart, the only mercy left to give. But when he pulled the blade free, no blood flowed. Only silver, liquid and luminous, that began crawling up the knife toward Rodrigo's hand. Rodrigo dropped the weapon, backed away. It can't be killed. Once it takes hold, there's no stopping it. Santiago looked around at the compound, at the workers preparing to flee, at the mine entrance, where rocks continued to shift and move, at the road leading to the villages, to Mexico City beyond, to millions of people who had no idea what was coming for them. Then, "We can't let it spread," he said quietly. "How do you propose we stop it?" "We're not soldiers. We have no weapons, no fire," Santiago interrupted. "My father wrote about a mine in Guanajuato. When the transformation started spreading, the owners burned everything. The mine, the workers' barracks, the entire compound. They said it was an accident, but my father suspected otherwise. The heat disrupted something about the silver's structure, kept it from spreading." Rodrigo stared at him. "You want to burn the compound, with us in it, with the infected in it. We evacuate everyone who's still fully human. Then we burn it all. The barracks, the equipment, everything that might carry contamination. And we collapse the mine entrance permanently. Bury whatever's down there so deep it never sees sunlight again. And if it doesn't work, if the fire just spreads the contamination faster, then we die trying to stop it instead of running away and letting it consume the city." For a long moment, Rodrigo said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud of you. Ingeniero. Or horrified. Maybe both." He turned to the assembled workers. "Listen to me. Everyone who's still fully human. Everyone who hasn't been touched by the silver gather at the north gate. Now! We're evacuating." "What about the mine?" someone called. "What about our wages? Our tools?" "The mine is cursed," Rodrigo roared. "The wages are paid in blood and silver. Anyone who wants to stay and collect their dues is welcome to go back down there and negotiate with what's coming up. Everyone else move." That got them moving. Workers grabbed what little they could carry, a few clothes, a picture of family, a religious icon, nothing heavy, nothing that would slow them down. Within minutes, 40 men were assembled at the north gate, casting fearful glances back at the mine entrance, where the rumbling had grown louder. "What about you?" one worker asked Rodrigo. "You're coming with us, right? Someone needs to make sure the fire burns hot enough. Someone needs to watch that entrance, make sure nothing gets out before the flames take hold." "That's going to be me. And the Ingeniero." "And me," said a voice. An old worker named Esteban stepped forward, his face grim. "My son is one of those things down there. I won't leave him to crawl around like a monster for eternity. I'll help you send him to rest." 2 others volunteered as well, young men named Marco and Luis, who had lost brothers in the collapse. Soon, 6 men stood ready to stay behind, to buy time with their lives if necessary. "Go," Rodrigo told the evacuees. "Get to the city. Tell Don Armando what happened. Tell the authorities, the church, anyone who'll listen. Tell them to seal every mine in the valley until they understand what they're dealing with. Now, go." The workers fled into the fading afternoon light, leaving behind 6 men and a mountain full of horrors. They worked quickly, gathering every combustible material in the compound: lamp oil, cooking oil, the workers' threadbare blankets, the dry timber from the barracks. They piled it around the mine entrance, creating a barrier of fuel that would, they hoped, incinerate anything trying to emerge. "More oil here," Santiago directed, soaking the wooden supports around the entrance. "We need the fire hot enough to melt silver. That's 962 degrees. Wood fire burns at around 600 normally, but with forced air and the right fuel. We're not in a university lecture hall, Ingeniero," Rodrigo said, but there was no harshness in his tone. The academic talk seemed to comfort both of them, a retreat into rationality in the face of cosmic horror. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Appropriate, Santiago thought. The mountain cast a long shadow across the compound. And in that shadow, temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. He could see his breath misting in the twilight. "They're close," Esteban whispered. "I can feel them. Can't you feel them?" Santiago could. A pressure in his skull, a sensation of being watched by 1,000 eyes. The silver things were just below, the debris pile, waiting, patient, knowing that all they had to do was wait for night to fall, for these foolish humans to make a mistake, to offer an opening. "Light it," he said, "before we lose our nerve." Rodrigo struck a match, held it to an oil-soaked rag. The flame caught, grew, spread hungrily across the fuel they'd piled. Within minutes, A wall of fire roared before the mine entrance, heat washing over them in waves that drove them back. And from within the flames, they heard singing. The transformed workers emerged from the rubble, their silver bodies impervious to heat. They walked through flames that would have instantly incinerated human flesh, their forms glowing white-hot but undamaged. Behind them came larger shapes, things that had never been human, that had lived in the deep places for millennia and were finally free. Madre de Dios, Marco whispered. It's not stopping them. The fire isn't stopping them. He was right. The silver things walked through the seventh inferno as if it were a summer breeze. Their forms rippled with heat, but didn't melt, didn't burn. They were beyond temperature, beyond pain, beyond any physical law that should have constrained them. "The support pillars!" Santiago shouted. "Collapse the entrance! Bury them!" They grabbed axes, swung at the main support beams that held up the rock face above the entrance. Wood splintered under their desperate blows. One beam gave way, then another. The rock face above groaned, shifted. A silver hand erupted from the flames and grabbed Luis. The young man screamed as transformation raced across his body, silver replacing flesh in seconds. His scream turned to laughter as his mind was rewritten. And then he was helping them, the silver things pulling him through the flames and into the darkness beyond. Luis. Marco lunged forward, but Esteban grabbed him. "He's gone! Don't let his death be for nothing!" The third support beam snapped. The entire rock face above the entrance began to slide, tons of stone grinding against stone. The silver things looked up at the collapsing mountain and, for the first time, showed something like concern. They retreated, flowing backward into the mine, disappearing into tunnels that were rapidly being crushed. But not all of them made it. 3 transformed workers and one of the larger things, a shape like a spider made of flowing mercury, were caught as the mountainside came down. They were buried under crushing weight, their silver bodies compressed, shattered, ground into metallic powder that glittered in the firelight. The collapse continued for 5 minutes, a rolling avalanche that filled the mine entrance, the main shaft, everything. When it finally stopped, where there had been a mine entrance, there was now only a massive pile of broken rock and still burning fuel. "Did we do it?" Marco asked, his voice shaking. "Is it over?" Santiago approached the debris pile carefully, watching for any sign of movement. The fire still burned hot enough that he couldn't get within 20 feet, but even from that distance, he could see silver glinting between the rocks, moving, flowing, trying to reconstitute. "It's not over," he said. "It's never over. We've only delayed it." Rodrigo sat down heavily on a chunk of broken timber. Blood ran from a dozen cuts and scrapes, and his clothes were scorched from the heat. "Then, what do? We can't stay here forever, watching. We seal it properly, the way the old ones did before the Spanish came, with prayers and blood and whatever magic they used to keep it contained for centuries. And we warn everyone, every mine in Mexico, every dig site, make them understand that there are some places that should never be disturbed." "No one will listen," Esteban said bitterly. "There's too much money in silver, too much profit to be had. They'll dig somewhere else, break some other seal, and start this all over again." He was probably right, Santiago knew. But what else could they do? Give up? Let the silver tide spread unchecked? A sound came from the rubble, not movement, but a voice, singing in that ancient language, the words worming into Santiago's mind, offering him visions of eternity, of transformation, of becoming something that would never die. "We need to leave," he said, "now, before it finds a way to influence us." They backed away from the collapsed mine, keeping the fire between them and the rubble. The flames would burn through the night, Santiago estimated. By morning, they would die down to embers, and then they would see if their desperate gambit had worked. As they walked toward the compound gate, Santiago looked back one final time. In the darkness beyond the firelight, he could have sworn he saw figures standing in the shadows, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, silver shapes, watching with patient, hungry eyes, waiting for their chance. They walked through the night, following the road toward Mexico City. None of them spoke. What was there to say? They had released something that should have remained forever sealed. They had witnessed the transformation of men into monsters, the awakening of something ancient and terrible. And they knew, with sickening certainty, that this was not over. It would never be over. Because somewhere in the darkness behind them, beneath tons of rock and ash, the silver things were digging. Patient as stone, hungry as time itself, digging their way toward the surface, toward the world of men, toward home. Mexico City, 3 days after the collapse. Santiago stood before the desk of Don Armando Vega in the man's opulent mansion, his clothes still stained with mine dust and blood, his hands trembling with exhaustion and suppressed rage. The mine owner sat behind polished mahogany, dressed in a silk waistcoat that probably cost more than Santiago would earn in a decade, and listened to the engineer's report with an expression of mild annoyance. "So you destroyed my mine," Don Armando said when Santiago finished. "Buried hundreds of thousands of pesos worth of equipment. Killed, how many workers was it?" 16, confirmed dead, Santiago said, through clenched teeth. "Another 23 unaccounted for. But that's not the point. What we released, what's still down there. Superstitious nonsense." Don Armando waved a dismissive hand. "Silver dust can cause hallucinations, Ingeniero. Mercury poisoning affects the mind. What you experienced was mass hysteria combined with a tragic structural failure. I saw men transform into living metal. I saw things that have no name, crawling up from chambers that predate human civilization. This wasn't hallucination. This was a very expensive mistake that you will be paying for." Don Armando pulled out a ledger, ran his finger down a column of numbers. "The insurance company is refusing to pay out, claiming negligence. The families of the dead workers are demanding compensation. And I have investors who expected a return that will now never materialize. So unless you can produce actual evidence of these silver monsters, I suggest you accept responsibility for the collapse and hope the authorities show mercy." Santiago slammed his hands on the desk. "We need to seal that mine permanently. We need to excavate the site carefully, with priests and scholars who understand what we're dealing with. We need to... What we need, Ingeniero Morales, is for you to stop spreading panic and undermining confidence in Mexico's mining industry." Don Armando stood, his false pleasantness dropping away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "I have already contracted a new team to excavate the site. They'll clear the collapse, assess the damage, and, if possible, resume operations within the month. Professional miners who understand that rocks are rocks and silver is silver, not hysterical children who see monsters in the dark. You're going to send more men to their auspic deaths. I'm going to salvage my investment. Now get out of my house before I have you arrested for sabotage." Santiago left the mansion in a daze. Rodrigo waited outside, leaning against a fountain in the courtyard, his face already telling Santiago that his own meeting with Don Armando had gone no better. "He won't listen," Rodrigo confirmed. "Worse, he's hired men from Zacatecas, hardened miners who've seen real disasters and survived. They think we're cowards who panicked and destroyed the mine to cover up our incompetence. Then we go higher. The church, the government. I tried. The Archbishop's secretary said they're not interested in pagan superstitions. The police told me to file a report and went back to their card game. As far as the city is concerned, there was a mining accident. Tragic, but not uncommon. End of story." Santiago wanted to scream. How could they make people understand? How could they convey the horror of what they'd witnessed when every rational authority dismissed it as fantasy? "The families," he said suddenly. "The families of the missing workers. They'll believe us. They'll want answers." "And then what? We convince a group of grieving widows and orphans that their husbands and fathers were transformed into silver demons? That helps them. How? It keeps them away from the mine. If Don Armando reopens it, if he tries to lure new workers with promises of high wages, we make sure everyone knows the truth. Make it impossible for him to find anyone desperate enough to dig there." Rodrigo considered this, then nodded slowly. "It's something. Not much, but something." They spent the next 3 days visiting the families of the dead and missing. The reception was mixed. Some listened to their story with dawning horror, crossing themselves and clutching rosaries. Others accused them of making excuses, of trying to avoid blame for a collapse that their negligence had caused. A few demanded they leave before they upset the children with their ghost stories. But a few listened, truly listened. Maria, the widow of Tomas, the first man to be taken by the silver, invited them into her tiny home on the outskirts of the city. Her 3 children watched from a doorway as she served watered-down pulque and listened to Santiago's account of her husband's final moments. "He called my name," she said when Santiago finished. "The night of the collapse, I was sleeping, and I heard Tomas calling me from the direction of the mine. His voice was wrong, too beautiful, too perfect, like a bell more than a man. I almost went to him. I almost left my bed and walked out into the night. But my daughter woke up crying, and by the time I'd soothed her back to sleep, the calling had stopped." Santiago felt ice creep down his spine. It was trying to reach you through him, using his voice, his memories, to draw you in. "I know. I could feel it. Something that knew me through Tomas, that wanted me to join him, to bring the children, to come down into the dark and be transformed into something that would never know hunger or cold or grief again." She met Santiago's eyes, and he saw a terrible understanding there. "Part of me wanted to go. Part of me still does, because even though I know my husband is dead, some piece of him remains in that thing. And it calls to me every night. You have to resist," Santiago said urgently. "Whatever it promises is a lie. Your husband is gone. What's left is wearing his face, but it's not him." "I know." Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "But knowing and feeling are different things. When I hear his voice in my dreams, offering me eternity with him, offering to end all our suffering, it's so hard to say no." They talked for another hour, and by the end, Maria had agreed to spread word among the other mining families, to warn them about the dangers, to keep their children away from the San Rafael site, to resist any voices that called from the darkness. It was a small victory, but Santiago clung to it. If they could warn enough people and create enough resistance, maybe Don Armando would be forced to abandon his plans to reopen the mine. But when they left Maria's home and began the long walk back to the center of the city, they found their path blocked by 3 men in expensive clothes. The leader, a heavy-set man with rings on every finger, stepped forward. Ingeniero Morales, Capataz Sanchez. Don Armando would like you to stop spreading rumors about his mine. We're telling the truth, Santiago said. The truth, Don Armando feels, is less important than business confidence. He's willing to offer you both generous compensation if you agree to sign statements admitting that the collapse was due to structural failure and your own errors in judgment. And if we refuse, the man smiled without warmth. Then Don Armando will be forced to pursue legal action for sabotage and negligence. You'll both be arrested, tried, and most likely imprisoned. He has witnesses prepared to testify that you deliberately weakened the supports, that you planted explosives with malicious intent, that you murdered 16 workers to cover up your incompetence. That's a lie, Rodrigo growled. It's whatever the courts decide it is. And the courts tend to decide in favor of men like Don Armando. The man produced papers from his jacket. Sign these, take the money, disappear into other provinces, and forget this ever happened. Or face the consequences. Santiago looked at Rodrigo. The foreman's hands were clenched into fists, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. For a moment, Santiago thought he might attack these men, damn the consequences. But slowly, Rodrigo's shoulders slumped in defeat. How much? He asked quietly. The amount they named was generous enough to relocate to another city, start fresh, maybe even buy a small piece of land. Blood money, hush money, the price of their souls and their silence. Santiago thought of Maria, hearing her husband's voice calling from the darkness, of the families who deserved to know what really happened, of the workers who would be sent into that cursed mine if they said nothing. No, he said. The man's smile vanished. I'd reconsider if I were you, Ingeniero. I'm sure you would, but I'm not you, and I'm not signing anything. The truth needs to be told, whatever the cost. Santiago Rodrigo started. You sign if you want, Santiago told him. I won't judge you. You have family to think of. But I'm not staying silent while more men are sent to their deaths. The heavy-set man studied Santiago for a long moment, then nodded to his companions. So be it. Don Armando will be disappointed but not surprised. He suspected you might be principled. He made the word sound like a disease. Expect a visit from the authorities within the week. I hope your principles keep you warm in prison, Ingeniero. They left, disappearing into the crowded streets. Rodrigo turned to Santiago, his expression torn between admiration and exasperation. You're a fool, you know that? Probably, but I can't live with myself otherwise. Noble, stupid, but noble. Rodrigo sighed heavily. I have a wife and 4 children. The youngest is only 6 months old. If I go to prison, they'll starve. So I'm going to sign their damned papers and take their damned money and hate myself for the rest of my life. But you're free of such obligations. So maybe you can do what I can't. Maybe you can actually stop this. How? I have no power, no influence, no resources. You have the truth. And you have time before they arrest you. Use it. Find someone who'll listen. A journalist, a scholar, a priest, who actually cares about truth more than politics. find anyone who might help, and make them understand. Rodrigo clasped Santiago's shoulder. Your father would be proud of you, muchacho. I hope you know that. My father is dead because he dug too deep and breathed too much mine dust. I'm not sure being like him is something to aspire to. Your father tried to warn people too. I met him once, years ago. He came to San Rafael and told us stories about other mines, other disasters. We laughed at him, called him a superstitious old fool. And now, Rodrigo's voice broke. Now I wish I'd listened. Maybe all those men would still be alive. He turned and walked away, leaving Santiago alone in the crowded street, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. Santiago found his unlikely ally in the last place he expected, a cantina near the university where scholars and students gathered to debate philosophy and science over cheap aguardiente. He'd been drowning his despair in drink for 2 hours when he overheard an argument at a nearby table, telling you there are phenomena that science cannot yet explain, a young priest was saying heatedly. The church has documented miracles, stigmata, demonic possessions, documented superstition, his companion interrupted. A thin man with wire-frame glasses and ink-stained fingers gestured dismissively with his drink. Every miracle has a rational explanation if you look hard enough. Faith is the enemy of truth, Father. It blinds you to reality. And your precious science blinds you to possibility, Raphael. You're so convinced that the world operates by fixed laws that you refuse to consider that those laws might be incomplete. The thin man Raphael laughed. Show me one genuine supernatural phenomenon. One, not stories, not testimonies, not ancient texts. Show me something I can examine, test, verify. Until then, I'll continue to believe that the universe operates according to discoverable principles, not the whims of invisible spirits. Santiago stood, swayed slightly, and walked to their table. What if I told you I've seen men transformed into living silver? That there's something beneath the earth that predates humanity and hungers to remake the world in its image? Both men stared at him. Then Raphael burst out laughing. Excellent timing. Another drunk with another ghost story. Sit down, asterisk, amigo asterisk, and tell us all about your silver demons. We could use some entertainment. I'm serious. 3 days ago, the San Rafael mine collapsed after we encountered something in the deepest chambers, something that, wait. The priest leaned forward, his expression suddenly intent. San Rafael, you're one of the survivors? Santiago Morales. I was the engineer on site. I heard about that collapse. Terrible tragedy. But the report said it was a structural failure, that the engineers had miscalculated. The reports are lies. The owner, Don Armando, is covering up what really happened because he wants to reopen the mine. But what's down there? If it gets out, if it spreads to the city. Santiago slumped into an empty chair, suddenly exhausted. You wanted proof of the proof? Supernatural? Come with me. I'll show you something that will change everything you think you know about the world. Raphael's mocking expression had faded, replaced by curiosity. What kind of proof? Silver that was once human flesh. Samples I took from the site before we fled. I can show you transformation happening in real time if you're brave enough to witness it. Now this I have to see. Raphael stood, throwing coins on the table for his drink. Lead on. Asterisk in genero asterisk. Let's see these miracles of yours. The priest, Father Miguel, he introduced himself, came too, his face troubled. They followed Santiago through the darkening streets to the boarding house where he'd been staying since the collapse. His room was sparse, containing only a bed, a desk, and a trunk where he'd stored the samples he'd managed to collect. He opened the trunk carefully, as if it might contain serpents. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 3 pieces of silver. But not ordinary silver, each piece retained hints of what it had once been. A hand, fingers still articulated, a fragment of face, one eye socket visible, and the tooth, that first piece he'd found, still warm to the touch. Raphael's skepticism evaporated instantly. He pulled out a magnifying glass, examined the samples with the intensity of a true scholar. This is extraordinary. The crystalline structure is unlike any silver I've seen. And there's something in the matrix, some kind of organic material fully integrated with the metal. This shouldn't be possible. Touch it, Santiago said. What? Touch the silver. Just for a second. You'll understand. Santiago? No. Father Miguel started, but Raphael had already reached out, his scientific curiosity overriding caution. His finger brushed the edge of the silver hand. He gasped, jerked back as if burned. But when he held up his finger, there was a tiny spot of silver at the point of contact. As they watched, it began to spread slowly, like frost forming, on glass, but unmistakably growing. Get it off, Raphael whispered, his voice rising in panic. Get it off me. Hold still! Father Miguel grabbed Raphael's hand, pulled out a small knife, and without hesitation scraped the silver spot from Raphael's finger. It came away reluctantly, leaving the flesh beneath raw and bleeding. The priest wrapped the wound quickly in clean cloth. Don't touch it again. Any of it. Raphael stared at his bandaged finger. All color drained from his face. What was that? I felt it. Not pain, but something else. A voice, offering me things, promising me. He looked up at Santiago, his eyes wide with terror and wonder. How long has this been happening? Centuries, maybe longer. The indigenous people knew about it. That's why they sealed the deep places. But the Spanish needed silver for their conquest, and we've continued to dig ever since. Every generation, we break through another seal, release another piece of whatever lives beneath the earth, and it grows stronger. We have to tell people, Raphael said, all his skepticism transformed into urgent conviction. This is the discovery of the age. This could revolutionize our understanding of. This could end civilization, Father Miguel interrupted. If what Santiago says is true, if this contamination spreads through contact, then exposing it widely would be catastrophic. We need to contain it, destroy it, not study it. But the scientific implications. Damn the implications. This is why the Church has protocols for dealing with the supernatural. Not everything that exists should be known. Not every door should be opened. The priest crossed himself. This is what we call demonic. Not in the sense of Christian devils, but in the sense of forces inimical to human existence. Ancient powers that our ancestors learned to seal away for good reason. Santiago listened to them argue, feeling a bitter satisfaction. At least now he wasn't alone in knowing the truth. At least now someone believed him. Don Armando is sending workers back to the site in 2 days, he said, interrupting their debate. He's going to try to clear the collapse and resume operations. We have to stop him. How? Raphael asked. You said yourself that he has political connections, legal resources. We make the truth impossible to ignore. We bring journalists, scientists, clergy, anyone with influence to the site. We show them what's happening. We force them to acknowledge reality even if it terrifies them. They'll think we're mad, Father Miguel said. Probably. But if even one of them believes, if even one person with authority sees what we've seen, it might be enough. It was a desperate plan, flimsy as spider silk, but it was all they had. 2 days later, a group of 12 people stood at the base of the mountain where the San Rafael mine had once operated. Santiago had managed to gather a surprisingly diverse crowd. Rafael and Father Miguel, 2 journalists from the city's newspapers, a professor of geology from the university, an officer from the police, and 5 family members of missing workers who demanded to know what had happened to their loved ones. Don Armando was already there, along with 20 workers he'd hired from Zacatecas, hard men with weathered faces, who looked at Santiago's group with open contempt. The mine owner's face darkened when he saw Santiago approaching. Ingeniero Morales, I thought you'd learned your lesson about interfering with my business. These people have a right to know what's buried here. Santiago replied, gesturing to the crowd. What you're planning to unleash on the city? The only thing I'm planning to unleash is economic prosperity. Now get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing. This isn't your property, Maria called out, stepping forward from the group of family members. This is where my husband died, where our fathers and sons and brothers were killed. We have a right to witness what you're doing here. Don Armando's expression softened slightly, a calculated display of sympathy. Senora, I understand your grief. The collapse was a tragedy. But dwelling on it, creating conspiracies and ghost stories, won't bring your husband back. The best way to honor the dead is to ensure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. The silver here can feed dozens of families, provide employment for years to come. Show them, Santiago said quietly to Rafael. Show them what we found. Rafael stepped forward, unwrapped the cloth bundle he'd been carrying. Inside were the silver samples, the hand, the face fragment, the tooth. Even in daylight, they possessed an unnatural quality, a wrongness that made the journalists lean back instinctively. These were recovered from the mine site, Rafael explained, his voice taking on the tone of academic lecture, probably the only way he could discuss such horrors without falling apart. The analysis is B-breeze, preliminary, but the structure is unprecedented. This appears to be human tissue that has undergone some form of transmutation into metallic form while maintaining organic properties. It's alive, in a sense, and it's infectious. It's a hoax, Don Armando scoffed. Probably silver dust mixed with mine debris. You're being manipulated by a disgraced engineer trying to avoid responsibility for his failures. Then explain this, Rafael said, and with tweezers carefully picked up the silver tooth. He held it close to a piece of raw meat he'd brought for demonstration mutton from the market. As they watched, the silver began to glow faintly, and tendrils of metallic growth extended toward the meat, seeking contact. Madre de Dios, one of the journalists whispered. It's responding to organic matter, Rafael continued, as if it recognizes flesh and wants to consume it, transform it. I've never seen anything like this in nature. This suggests the presence of some form of A. Scream cut through his explanation. Everyone turned toward the collapsed mine entrance. One of Don Armando's workers, a young man who'd been clearing debris from the pile, was stumbling backward, clutching his hand. Silver spread across his palm like liquid frost, racing up his wrist toward his arm. "Help me!" he screamed. "It bit me! Something under the rocks bit me!" The worker fell to his knees, and they all watched in horrified fascination as the transformation took hold. Silver spread across his body in waves, his flesh hardening, becoming reflective. His screams turned to laughter, that terrible, ecstatic laughter Santiago remembered too well. "It's beautiful," the worker gasped. "I can see everything. I can hear the song beneath the earth. It's calling to all of us, calling us home, calling us to." Father Miguel was already moving. He pulled a flask of holy water from his robes, splashed it across the transforming man. Where the water touched Silver, steam rose with a smell like burning metal. The worker screamed, this time in genuine pain, and the Silver's advance slowed. "The rubble!" Santiago shouted. "Something's in the rubble! Everyone back!" But it was too late. The debris pile was moving, rocks shifting aside as if pushed by invisible hands. And from the gaps between stones, silver began to flow, not in solid pieces, but as liquid metal, pooling, spreading, seeking. The Zacatecas workers ran. Professional miners or not, they recognized supernatural danger when they saw it. Most of Don Armando's hired men fled toward the road, abandoning tools and courage alike. But 3 of them were too slow. The silver caught them, pulled them down, began the transformation. "We have to stop it!" one of the journalists yelled. "Do something! Fire!" Santiago remembered. "Rafael, do you have matches? We need to." But even as he spoke, he realized the futility. They had no fuel prepared, no oil or timber ready to burn, and the silver was flowing, faster now, spreading across the ground like a living thing, reaching toward the assembled witnesses with terrible purpose. Father Miguel stepped forward, pulling out a crucifix. He began to chant in Latin prayers of exorcism, of banishment. Where he walked, the silver recoiled slightly, as if his faith created a barrier it couldn't cross. But he couldn't be everywhere at once, and there was so much silver emerging from the collapsed mine. "The shrine!" Maria shouted. "The old shrine by the entrance! My grandmother told me there were prayers carved into it, seals made by the priests who first found this place." Santiago ran toward where the shrine had stood before the explosion. Most of it was destroyed, but the base remained a stone foundation carved with symbols that predated the Spanish conquest. He could feel power radiating from those carvings, old magic that made his skin prickle. "Help me!" he called to the others. "We need to expose more of these symbols." They dug, frantically, clearing away debris to reveal more of the foundation. The symbols formed a pattern, a circle with intricate designs radiating inward, all pointing toward a central glyph that looked like a mouth being sealed shut. And as they exposed more of the pattern, the silver's advance slowed. "It's working!" Rafael gasped. "The symbols are acting as some kind of barrier." Don Armando watched all of this with an expression of dawning horror. His certainty, his skepticism, his careful plans, all of it crumbling as he witnessed the impossible. "This can't be real," he muttered. "This isn't possible." "Believe it," Santiago said harshly. "This is what you've been sending men to die for. This is the true price of your silver." The silver had stopped advancing now, held back by the ancient symbols, but it wasn't retreating either. It pooled at the edge of the protective circle, seething, testing for weaknesses. And from deep within the collapsed mine, they could hear, singing dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all harmonizing, in that alien language that hurt to hear. "We can't hold this forever," Father Miguel said, sweat streaming down his face from the effort of maintaining his prayers. "This is a temporary reprieve, nothing more. Whatever's down there is too strong, too ancient. It will eventually find a way through." "Then we need a permanent solution," Santiago said. He turned to the geology professor, who had been standing in shocked silence. "Professor Mendoza, if we wanted to seal this site completely, not just collapse a few tunnels but bury the entire complex under the mountain, how would we do it?" Professor Mendoza blinked, his academic mind struggling to function in the face of the supernatural. "You'd need extensive explosives. Plant charges at critical stress points throughout the mountain structure. Create a controlled avalanche that would bury the entire valley under thousands of tons of rock. Could it be done? Theoretically, yes, but it would take weeks to plan, months to execute. You'd need engineers, demolition experts, government approval." "We don't have weeks," Santiago interrupted. "We have hours, maybe days before that thing breaks through. Can you design something faster, cruder, something that would at least buy us time?" The professor's eyes focused, his training taking over. "The mine itself. There are blast holes already drilled throughout the complex from normal operations. If we could access them, fill them with enough powder, yes, we might be able to trigger a cascade failure. Bury the site under its own weight. The entrance is blocked," one of the journalists pointed out, "and we can't go through that." He gestured at the silver pooling beyond the protective circle. Santiago looked at the mountain, at the smoke still rising from vents in the rock face, at the old tunnels that honeycombed the upper levels. There are other entrances, ventilation shafts, emergency exits, exploratory tunnels from years ago. I studied the surveys. Some of them connect to the main complex, and some of them are filled with those things. Rodrigo's voice called out. Santiago turned to see the foreman approaching, carrying sacks of blasting powder and fuse cord. Behind him came Esteban and Marco, the men who'd stayed behind during the collapse. "We couldn't stay away," Rodrigo explained. "Heard you were coming back here. Figured you'd do something stupid and noble that would require explosives." He set down the supplies. "We also brought something else." He unwrapped a cloth bundle to reveal old papers, maps, and documents, yellow with age. "These are from my grandfather's time. The original surveys of this mountain before the San Rafael mine was even started. They show the old Aztec tunnels, the places the indigenous people marked as forbidden, and they show the best places to collapse the mountain." Santiago took the papers with trembling hands. Cartography was crude by modern standards, but the information was invaluable. Whoever had drawn these maps had known the mountain intimately, had understood its structure in ways that went beyond mere geology. "This shows a chamber," he said, pointing to a marking deep within the mountain, "larger than any we found. It's marked with warnings in Nahuatl." He looked at Father Miguel. "Can you read this?" The priest studied the ancient script, his face growing pale. "It says, 'Heart of the Beast,' and below that, 'Where the silver god sleeps,' where the transformation began, where all flesh becomes one." "That's the source," Santiago breathed. "That's where it's strongest. If we can collapse that chamber, seal the heart, maybe we can trap it permanently. Or release it completely," Raphael warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with. This could be a containment system, and we might be breaking the one thing keeping it from spreading globally." "It's already spreading," Maria said quietly. She pointed to the silver pool. It had grown larger, fed by more liquid metal flowing from the collapsed mine. And in its surface, they could see reflections that weren't quite right, faces that looked back with silver eyes, hands that reached up from impossible depths. My husband is in there. I can feel him calling to me. If we don't stop this now, he'll call until I answer, until we all answer. Don Armando had been standing in silence, watching his world unravel. Now he spoke, his voice hollow. I'll provide whatever resources you need. Money, men, equipment. Just stop this. Stop what I've done. We don't need your money, Santiago said coldly. We need your silence. Call off your workers. Tell the authorities this site is permanently closed due to geological instability, and never, ever try to dig here again. And if I don't, then we tell everyone what we've seen here today. We show them the silver samples. We bring them here to witness the horror you've unleashed. Your reputation will be destroyed, your fortune confiscated, your name synonymous with the death of dozens. Or you can walk away now, write off your losses, and live with the guilt. Don Armando looked at the silver pool, at the transformed workers twitching at its edge, at the impossible horror he'd created in pursuit of profit. I'll tell them the mine is closed, he whispered. Then louder. I'll spread word that this site is cursed, that anyone who digs here will die. I'll buy the land around it, declare it a nature preserve, do whatever it takes to keep people away. See that you do. Santiago turned back to his allies, this strange collection of scholars, clergy, family members, and hardened miners. We have one chance at this, one chance to seal the heart before whatever's down there fully awakens. Who's coming with me? I am, Raphael said immediately. Someone needs to document this scientifically. I'll go, Father Miguel added. Someone needs to pray. And I'll guide you, Rodrigo said. I know those tunnels better than anyone alive. The others, the journalists, the professor, the police officer, volunteered to stay above ground, to maintain the protective circle, to prepare secondary charges at the surface entrances, to ensure that if the primary plan failed, they could at least contain the contamination through brute force burial. Maria approached Santiago before they left. Bring him peace, she said simply. Whatever part of Tomas remains in that thing, free him if you can. Let him rest. I'll try, Santiago promised, knowing he probably couldn't keep it. The old ventilation shaft descended at a steep angle, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Santiago led the way, his lamp casting wild shadows on walls that glistened with moisture and something else, thin veins of silver that pulsed with faint light, like blood vessels carrying luminous fluid. The contamination has spread through the entire mountain, Raphael observed, taking samples despite their desperate circumstances. These veins weren't here before, were they? No, Rodrigo confirmed from behind them. This is new. The mountain is being transformed from within, converted into whatever that thing needs to survive. They descended for what felt like hours, though Santiago's pocket watch insisted only 40 minutes had passed. Time felt strange here, elastic. Sometimes the tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly. Sometimes it compressed, bringing distant sounds, terrifyingly close. Voices echoed through the passages. Not the singing they'd heard before, but conversations, workers discussing their day's labor, families laughing over dinner, children playing games. All perfectly normal sounds that were completely wrong in this context. Don't listen, Father Miguel warned. It's trying to disorient us, make us remember what we've lost. Keep moving. They emerged into a chamber that Santiago recognized from the Bellici. Surveys an old exploratory tunnel from 50 years ago, abandoned when it failed to yield significant ore. But it wasn't abandoned now. The walls were covered in growth, not quite organic, not quite mineral. Structures that looked like coral or crystallized trees, all made of silver, all pulsing with that faint internal light. "It's growing," Raphael whispered. "Creating structures, patterns. This isn't random contamination. It's building something." They moved through the chamber carefully, trying not to touch the silver growths. But the floor was slick with metallic residue, and Santiago's foot slipped. His hand shot out instinctively, grabbing one of the structures for balance. The moment his skin contacted the silver, his mind exploded with visions. He saw the mountain as it had been millions of years ago, a volcano, still active, its heart full of magma. And in that magma, something had formed, something that arose from the intersection of heat and pressure and minerals, a consciousness born from geology itself. He saw the first humans arrive, saw them discover the chambers and the thing within, saw them try to communicate with it, to understand it, saw the first transformations willing sacrifices who gave themselves to become part of something greater. For centuries, there had been balance. The silver god, that's what they called it, would transform a few chosen individuals in exchange for protection, for wisdom, for visions of the deep earth. But then the Spanish came. They breached the sacred chambers with greed rather than reverence. They took silver without offering anything in return. And the god, starved of proper sacrifice, began to hunger, began to reach out indiscriminately, taking whoever came near. The balance broke, and what had been a symbiotic relationship became predation. Santiago jerked his hand away, gasping. The visions faded, but their echo remained in his mind. "It's not evil," he said, struggling to find words for what he'd experienced. "It's alien, operating by rules we don't understand. To it, transformation isn't death, but transcendence. It genuinely believes it's offering us something wonderful." "That doesn't make it less dangerous," Rodrigo said grimly. "A tiger that eats you because it's hungry isn't evil either. But you're still dead." They continued deeper, following Rodrigo's guidance and the old maps. The tunnels grew warmer, more humid. The air took on that smell of rotting flowers, so strong now that Santiago could taste it. And everywhere, the silver grew more prevalent, coating the walls, dripping from the ceiling, pooling in the depressions. They encountered the first transformed worker in a narrow passage. He had been there for some time, judging by the way its body had merged with the tunnel wall, becoming part of the structure. Its silver eyes tracked their movement, and its mouth moved, forming words in multiple languages simultaneously. Come, join, become, transform, transcend, home, unity, forever. Father Miguel splashed it with holy water. The thing screamed not in pain, but in confusion, as if it couldn't understand why they'd reject such a gift. "How much further?" Santiago asked. "The heart chamber should be just ahead," Rodrigo said, consulting the map. "But there's something wrong. The tunnels don't match the survey anymore. The mountain has changed." He was right. The passages ahead had been reshaped, widened, smoothed. The rough-hewn tunnels of human mining had been transformed into something more organic, curved surfaces that reminded Santiago of blood vessels or intestines. They were walking through the body of something vast, something that encompassed the entire mountain. The singing grew louder. They were getting close. The tunnel opened into the heart chamber, and Santiago's mind struggled to process what he saw. The chamber was immense, a cathedral-sized space that shouldn't exist within the mountain's structure, and every surface was silver, not coating the stone but replacing it, as if the rock itself had been converted. The ceiling stretched away into darkness that lamplight couldn't penetrate, and the floor was a lake of liquid silver, perfectly still, perfectly reflective. In the center of the lake stood a figure. At first glance, it looked like a statue, a human form cast in silver, standing with arms outstretched as if welcoming visitors. But as they approached cautiously, staying at the chamber's edge, Santiago realized it was moving, breathing. The chest rose and fell with glacial slowness, and the eyes, those terrible silver eyes, tracked their movement. "That's Miguel Torres," Rodrigo said, his voice breaking. "The first man taken. He's become the core, the seed from which all this grows." "Not just Miguel," Raphael said, pointing. "Look, you can see others. Dozens of them merged together. All the missing workers, all the victims over decades. They've been incorporated into a single entity." He was right. If you looked carefully at the figure's surface, you could see faces beneath the silver skin, men and women and children, all pressed together, all sharing that body, that consciousness, all singing in harmony. "We have to destroy it," Santiago said. "How?" Father Miguel asked. "This thing is beyond physical. It's become mythic. A god in truth, if not in virtue." "Gods bleed," Rodrigo said. He pulled out his knife, the same knife he'd tried to use on Augusto days ago. "And silver melts. We brought enough explosives to bring down this mountain. Let's see if we can shatter its heart first." They began placing charges around the chamber's edge, connecting them with fuse cord in patterns that Rodrigo assured them would maximize the blast effect. Santiago worked mechanically, trying not to look at the figure in the lake, trying not to hear the voices calling to him. But one voice cut through all the others, his father's voice. "Santiago, mijo, why are you fighting this? I'm here. I'm part of something beautiful. Come join me. Let me show you wonders you can't imagine. Let me share eternity with you." Santiago's hands trembled as he placed another charge. "You're not my father. You're wearing his memories like stolen clothes. I am your father, and also everyone else who's ever died in these mines. Everyone who's given themselves to transformation. We're all here, all united. No more loneliness, no more pain, no more death. Just endless existence in perfect harmony." "It's lying," Father Miguel said urgently, working beside Santiago. "Whatever promises it makes are false. This isn't transcendence, it's dissolution. The erasure of everything that makes you individual." "Is individuality such a gift?" the figure asked. And now it spoke with multiple voices. Santiago's father, Miguel Torres, Tomas, all the workers who disappeared. You spend your lives separate, alone, dying a little, more each day. We offer wholeness, completion, unity with the earth itself. We offer death, Rodrigo countered. He had finished placing the charges and now stood facing the figure, his face hard. "I've spent 40 years in these mines. I've seen what you do. You consume people and leave nothing but silver corpses. You're a parasite, nothing more. We are transformation, the next stage of human evolution. Join us, Rodrigo Sanchez. Your father is here. Your grandfather. 3 generations of your family, all waiting to welcome you home. Rodrigo hesitated. Just for a moment, his hard expression cracked, revealing the pain beneath. Santiago saw him sway toward the lake, saw his foot begin to step forward. "Rodrigo!" Santiago grabbed his arm. "Remember your family, your wife, your children. They need you above, in the real world, not down here in this nightmare." The foreman's eyes focused. He stepped back, crossed himself. "Light it," he said hoarsely. "Light it, before I change my mind." Raphael struck the match. The fuse caught, began burning toward the charges. They had 90 seconds, enough time to reach the tunnel and start climbing back toward the surface. Enough time to escape the initial blast. They ran. Behind them, the figure in the lake began to move faster, no longer glacial but urgent. It stepped forward, walking across the liquid silver toward them. And the voices, all those voices, merged into one, screamed in rage and loss and terrible understanding. "No! You can't! We're only trying to help! We're trying to save you from death, from mortality!" From the first charge detonated, the sound was beyond hearing, a physical force that threw them forward, that made the tunnel walls crack and the ceiling rain dust. More charges followed in rapid succession, each one precisely placed to maximize destruction. The heart chamber collapsed, tons of rock falling into it, crushing the silver figure, burying the lake beneath the mountain's weight. But still they ran. Because the mountain itself was screaming now, the entire structure shaking as whatever vast consciousness inhabited it reacted to the destruction of its core. Cracks spread through the walls, silver pouring from each fissure like blood from wounds. "Faster!" Rodrigo shouted. "The whole mountain is coming down!" They scrambled up the ventilation shaft, hands and feet finding purchase through instinct and desperation. Silver tendrils pursued them, reaching from below, trying to grab and pull them back. Father Miguel's prayers created momentary barriers. Raphael's scientific understanding helped them avoid unstable sections, and Rodrigo's knowledge of the tunnels kept them from getting lost in the chaos. Santiago climbed until his muscles screamed, until his hands bled, until he could barely breathe. But still he climbed, driven by the knowledge that if he stopped, if he fell, he would be incorporated into that vast silver consciousness. He would lose himself, forever in the collective. Light appeared above blessed daylight, the entrance to the ventilation shaft. Hands reached down to help them, the journalists, Professor Mendoza, the family members. They pulled Santiago, Raphael, Father Miguel, and Rodrigo up into the air and sunlight, just as the final, largest charges detonated deep within the mountain. The entire peak shifted, settled, compressed. Tunnels collapsed throughout the complex. The silver veins that had spread through the mountain were crushed, buried under millions of tons of rock. And from somewhere far below, they heard one final sound, not singing, but a scream of rage that echoed for 3 full seconds before cutting off abruptly. Then, silence. They lay on the ground, gasping, alive. Around them, the compound was empty. Don Armando and his workers had fled at the first sign of the mountain's collapse. The protective circles still held, the ancient symbols still glowing faintly, and the silver pool that had been spreading toward them had stopped growing. It lay there, inert, slowly hardening into solid metal as whatever animating force had driven it was cut off. "Is it over?" Maria asked quietly. Santiago looked at the mountain, now shorter by 20 feet. Its peak flattened, great chunks of its facade crumbled away. In the devastation, He could see exposed rock layers showing the mountain's age. Millions of years of geology, of pressure and heat and transformation. For now, he said, we've destroyed the heart, cut off the main concentration. But there are still traces of it throughout the mountain, still fragments of transformed workers buried in the rubble. It's not dead. You can't kill something that was never really alive in the way we understand it. But it's dormant, trapped, sealed. Again. For how long? En and den, Raphael asked. Until someone digs deep enough to release it. Until greed or curiosity or desperation drives men to break through what we've buried. Santiago looked at each of Kay. Them, these people who'd witnessed the impossible and survived. That's why we have to document everything, write it down, publish it, make sure future generations know what lies beneath these mountains. Make sure they understand that some places should remain undisturbed. Professor Mendoza was already sketching the collapsed mountain, making notations. The journalists were interviewing survivors, recording testimonies. Father Miguel was performing last rites over the hardened silver pool, blessing the fragments of people trapped within. Don Armando appeared an hour later, looking diminished, aged. He signed papers transferring ownership of the mountain and surrounding land to a trust managed by Father Miguel's church. He provided funding to ensure the site would be monitored, protected, kept clear of development. Then he left, driving back to Mexico City in silence, his dreams of wealth and power crushed under tons of stone. As the sun set on that terrible day, Santiago sat on a rock overlooking the collapsed mine, his father's journal open in his lap. He'd started a new entry, documenting everything that had happened, but words felt inadequate to capture the horror, the wonder, the terrible understanding he'd gained. Maria joined him, carrying flowers to place at the sealed mine entrance. "Thank you," she said simply, "for trying, for caring enough to stop it. I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because it was necessary. Still, you could have run, could have signed Don Armando's papers and disappeared. You chose to fight instead." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. In the darkness, Santiago could still feel a faint vibration from deep within the mountain. Not threatening, but present. A reminder that what they'd fought today wasn't gone, merely waiting, patient as stone, eternal as the earth itself. "What will you do now?" Maria asked. "Travel. Visit every major mine in Mexico. Document what I've learned. Try to identify other places where this might be happening. Warn people before they dig too deep. A wandering prophet of underground horrors," she said with a slight smile. "Your father would be proud." "My father was a fool who spent his life trying to warn people who wouldn't listen. I'm following in his footsteps. That doesn't seem like something to be proud of." "It's better than doing nothing." Perhaps she was right. Perhaps bearing witness was enough. Perhaps by recording the truth, by preserving the knowledge, he could save a few lives somewhere down the line. Or perhaps, like his father, he'd be dismissed as a madman, and future generations would make the same mistakes, would dig in the same cursed places, would release the same ancient horrors. The mountain breathed beneath them, not dead but sleeping. And in his dreams, that night and every night after, Santiago would hear it singing, calling, waiting, promising transformation, promising transcendence, promising to make him whole. But he would resist. For Maria's sake, for the memory of all those who'd been consumed, for the future generations who deserved to walk the earth without fear of what slept beneath it, he would resist, until the day he couldn't anymore. Until the day the mountain finally claimed him, as it claimed all men who spent too long in its shadow. But that day was not today. Today, he was still human, still himself, still fighting, and that would have to be enough. In 1856, 1 year after these events, the Mexican government issued a decree banning all mining operations in the Sierra de las Cruces mountain range. Official records cite geological instability as the reason. The San Rafael mine was buried under a permanent memorial, and the surrounding land was declared a nature preserve. Santiago Morales spent the next 20 years visiting mines throughout Mexico and South America, documenting similar incidents and attempting to warn against digging in certain areas. His writings were largely dismissed as superstition by the scientific community. He disappeared in 1875 while investigating a mine in Peru. His body was never found. The San Rafael site remains sealed to this day. Local legends speak of silver voices that sometimes call from the mountain on moonless nights, singing songs in a language older than mankind, promising wonders to anyone brave or foolish enough to dig beneath the surface. No one has accepted the invitation, yet